Commercial Construction Coffee Talk fans. Thanks for chiming in. My name's David Corson. I'm your host. I'm also the publisher and editor of Commercial Construction and Renovation magazine. Oh, I got a little glare on there. Hey, this is what the magazine looks like. I'm digital now, but this is what it used to like when it was print. So anyway, thanks for finding us on the web today. I'm actually remote. This is my last year's background. I'm up here in Springboro, Ohio, and been up here for a couple of weeks helping my mom recover from Ramsey Hunt. She got COVID and she got sick, and anyway, she ended up with this, and helping her box up some stuff at the house, and what good sons do. You help out. So anyway, but been sizzling hot. Had some wicked storms come through Monday afternoon, knocked out all the power, cell service, internet. About 600,000 people from Detroit all the way down into northern Kentucky got hit, and was out of power for the last couple of days. We just got the power on. So Duke Energy, listen, you guys were probably working 72 hours straight. You guys are great. As far as I'm concerned, you're a front liner. I mean, there was trees down all over the place. And had to end up at Starbucks kind of the last couple of days, trying to catch up on email, and the place was packed because a lot of people didn't have power, and that was the only place where just north of town that was open where you could go. So, but I'll tell you, without power and technology, we're sitting at night, candles, we're listening to an AM radio. I felt like I was like it was like deja vu. I was back in the 1930s, listening to the old radio. It was actually kind of nice, spent some time with my mom talking about old times. It was actually pretty nice. Not too hot in the house. Put the shades down, and didn't open the refrigerator. Got some bags of ice, threw it in there. And I'll tell you the biggest thing. She's like, I wish I would have gotten a generator. And I said, yeah, but you need to get a solar generator because the gas ones are really loud. Our neighbors had one, and I heard it all night long. And but you really need to be prepared. I was a Boy Scout. Be prepared. And having a generator, a solar generator, I think is a really good idea. And earlier this year, I went out and got 3 months of dry food, MREs. If you know what in the military, what they feed themselves, just so I had it at the house. And I got a couple. I'm not a prepper, but I just went and got a couple other things. And I've been looking at this solar generator. One where you can get 96 batteries in the wall and all this stuff. And so when I get home back to Atlanta, first thing I'm doing is I'm ordering that solar generator. I've been putting it off long enough. It's I'd rather have it and not have it. And but I'll tell you, when the power goes out, hey, if you have a Tesla, you weren't charging it. If you were trying to get gas around in this area, all the gas stations were closed because they had no power. So it it really does put a damper on it, and it puts everything. When you live in reality and you want to mess with the American psyche, boy, man, take your power away. You can't go anywhere, and you don't have your phone and this and that. You don't know what to do with your hands because everybody's got their phone glued to themselves. It was a really interesting experience the last couple of days, but I thoroughly enjoyed it. It was actually really nice listening to the radio, sitting in the dark with the candles, and the best was when the power went on finally, all the lights were on. It was like New Year's. The fan went on, the lights went on. I woke up at like 5 o'clock in the morning. And it was like, yeehaw, So anyway, hope everybody's having a great week. You're staying cool out there. Dog days of summer here. Today, I went to school. I was an economics major. So I have, people reach out to me all the time to be on the show. And we have all sorts of individuals, that have good stories. But today I have Mr. Storm Cunningham. He's with the Reconomics Institute. And what they do is they improve the process of improving places. He's out of Virginia, Arlington, I believe, correct? And Storm, say hello to our audience out there on Commercial Construction Coffee Talk.
Hey, folks.
And, listen, the reason why I had Storm on was because sustainability and, processes, and everybody's trying to figure out the best way to, to build and maintain, et cetera. Sorry, that was my phone ringing. But I figured, he had a really good story. Plus I was an econ major. So, I was like, yeah, this is awesome. And so Storm, the way that this works, we kind of go in 3 phases. You're going to have to tell your story where you grew up, you got any sisters, where you went to school, and how you ended up where you are today. And then we'll talk about the roller coaster over the last 24 months. And then we'll finish out, with one positive thought or phrase and your contact info. So with that said, the floor is yours, Storm. Tell us your story.
All right. Well, thanks for having me on, David.
Pleasure.
There's no real short story for somebody of my age.
Come on, you're only 26. Come on. I mean, I got my beard here. I'm giving my age away. Come on now.
Yeah, I have to say you're very well preserved for somebody who's got deja vu about the 1930s.
Yeah. Listen, I come from a military family. So, my grandfather, I still have all the old Super 8s. And they, I remember one of them, they're all sitting around and they're listening to the radio, the big box. And, my mom's like, I just got this radio. Let me find it. It's a weather radio, but anyway, it worked. And, you're just sitting there in the dark and it kind of was like, wow, deja vu. I feel like I was back there. So watching the movie of my grandfather way back when. So anyway,
yeah,
sorry to break in.
Speaking of the military, that's kind of how I came into the world since my mother's English. I grew up in England when I was very young, and she was a war bride. My father was Air Force, U.S. Air Force, U.S. Army Air Corps at the time. And so that's how I got started, combination of England and the military. Actually was born in New Jersey, been all over the place. My father decided to go to college when he was 40 years old, so he dragged us all around the country, Iowa, Nebraska, California. And since then, I've lived in Vermont, went to school in Vermont, and then lived in the Tampa Bay area for 15 years. So the short story about how I got into all of this stuff is I've always been very green and sustainable oriented. And in the 80s, I read Paul Hawken's first book about how to grow a business. And it really resonated with me, this whole idea that you can actually do good things for the world and make a living at the same time. So I spent most of the 80s looking for that, even though I was actually in the computer industry, the early days of the PC industry back then. And when I was in the military back in the early 70s, I was on a Green Beret scuba team, and I stuck with the scuba diving. And in the late 80s, I heard about this German scientist working in Jamaica who had invented a way of restoring damaged coral reefs, which sounded to me impossible. I mean, it takes thousands of years for a coral reef to aggregate. How the heck are you going to restore one? Mm-hmm. And but it sounded interesting, and he was putting out a call for volunteer divers to help him install these things on the ocean floor. So I went down to Jamaica for a week and helped him out and saw the results of what he had been doing for the past year or so, and it was absolutely phenomenal. Jamaica at that time had already lost about 90% of its reefs. And here was these spots there where they had been totally dead, and 6 months later were teeming with life. And that's when it suddenly hit me that we don't have to be dissatisfied with merely being green or merely being sustainable, because most green and sustainable stuff is about reducing waste, reducing toxicity, reducing energy use. In other words, it's looking to reduce damage to the world, but we're not going to have a better world just by slowing down the rate at which we destroy it. The only way we can have a better world is by restoring the damage we've done. And that's when it really hit me. And I got into some restorative businesses like down in Florida, and then decided I needed to learn the world of construction. All my expertise at that point was in the natural world, but it's the built world that's destroying the natural world. Sure. So I figured I can't really be all I can be unless I understood the built environment. So I got a job as Director of Strategic Initiatives at the Construction Specifications Institute here in Alexandria, Virginia. Was with them for about half a dozen years. And when I got the job with them, having been self-employed, I knew I could maybe survive 5 or 6 years in a 9-to-5 environment before going crazy. So I decided I needed an exit strategy and figured writing a book would be a good one. It would give me a platform to launch into a new direction from, since back in those days, before all this self-publishing on Amazon, people actually had to jump through some hoops to get published. So there was some kind of assumption that if you were actually published from a real publisher, that you actually knew something about what you were talking about. But that was the illusion anyway.
Yeah.
And I started writing The Restoration Economy, which was my first book. I'm basically on my first day of work. I came in at 6 o'clock every morning, wrote until 9 o'clock, and then started my 9 to 5 at CSI. And about 5 years later, 2002, that first book was published. And I did the usual thing of jumping into, consulting and speaking and doing workshops and all that sort of stuff. And that's what I've been doing ever since.
Yeah. I'm very familiar with CSI. Used to walk the show, every year, before, all this stuff happened and, things got shut down. My family, I come from a construction family, even military, but on my mother's side, our recycling business has been in business since 1888. And it's like fifth generation. My cousins are running it today. Anyway, we do steel recycling. So we were doing sustainability way back when, before anybody even had that word sustainability.
Right.
We looked at it as another person's junk is our goal. And before we got on, we were talking about Super 8 movies and this and that. I've got movies of after World War II, we were recycling tanks and Jeeps, in the scrapyard, and we had an auto showcase where my grandparents had bought all the SKUs for all of the old cars and stuff, and they started restoration. So if you needed a part for a Model T or old motorcycle, whatever, they actually would have it. Then they actually started building. So they had an auto museum called Pollock Auto Museum. You can Google it. And anyway, we had all sorts of cars in there, hundreds of them. But people from all over the world would call us and, do you have this part, or can you help us restore this? And I was always up there, jumping the cars, tinkering and this and that. And, I don't know, I always had my erector set. I was always down at the scrapyard playing in the crane. So, the whole sustainability thing, I laugh when people say it. They think it just happened, but my family was doing it for the last 140 years, and we're still doing it. So it's an amazing thing. But first I want to say thank you for your service. All right. We really appreciate that. And, and being a diver, that's dicey in itself. So, I give you kudos on that. But the reef story is a really good thing. You go in there, it's barren, it's dead. And then all of a sudden you go in and, you basically reseed it or replant it. And, it flourishes. Coral reef is kind of like bamboo, man. Once it gets going, it just spreads and it brings back all sorts of stuff. So, really, really, really good story.
Yeah, and you can be restorative in the built environment too. One of my favorite stories, I actually put in my second book, Rewealth, came out from McGraw-Hill in 2008. And it was a story of Tom Darden. Are you familiar with him?
I've heard the name. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so he started, originally he was just kind of an investor. And back in the very early days of the brownfields, the EPA started their brownfields program in '95. Which is one of the things that stimulated me to write my book. The Restoration Economy had a chapter on brownfields, which might have been the first book to actually document this brand new industry that nobody had ever heard of. And so he bought this defunct clay brick manufacturing company. And it wasn't making any money because, making bricks takes a whole lot of energy. It's an expensive process. Mm-hmm. And he had this brilliant insight as he saw the rise of this brownfields remediation industry and redevelopment industry. He saw that they were, in many cases, they weren't cleaning the ground on site, because that takes too long. They needed to redevelop the site right away. So they were spending huge amounts of time and effort and money and energy carting up this contaminated dirt from this old industrial site, usually an industrial site, mm-hmm. and carting it off somewhere else where they would decontaminate it. And many times that was also a high energy process. They would bake it until the contaminants were burned out of it. And he had this brilliant idea of, well, hell, a lot of that soil is rich in clay. why don't I just offer to take that contaminated soil off their hands? I'll come over here, bake it into bricks. The baking process removes the contamination. So, and that's what happened. People actually paying him, instead of him having to pay to go out and excavate clay, people were paying him to take their clay and turn it into bricks. And all of a sudden, his brick making company became super profitable. So he was doing two things there. He was decontaminating the planet, and at the same time, he was helping communities redevelop their contaminated sites so they could revitalize their local economy. And that's a very regenerative business.
Oh yeah, oh yeah. I remember one of my jobs. We were doing a demolition job on I-95 outside of Philly, and I had to go in and knock down all the asbestos off all the steel pipes before we could knock down the building. All the asbestos had to get in there, so I had to wear the suit. I was a hose man. I did all that stuff, and but that site was an industrial site, and now I don't know what's there, but we demolished it and cleared it all out, and they redeveloped it, and at the time. I'm not thinking about it. I'm just thinking about my paycheck every week at, 16, working my tail off in the hot sun and the humidity in Philadelphia. But when I look back, I'm like, wow, I actually was doing stuff because, that steel was going to get recycled, all the other, but the soil and all that stuff, it all had to get cleaned up. Someone had to, I'm sure, because before you put the new slab down or the concrete or whatever, it's got to be soil tested and so. I'm listening to your story about the brick. I'm like, yeah, I was doing that, So deja vu again. And so, when the roller coaster started 24 months ago in March of 2020, as we kind of went through it, it's going to be a couple of weeks, and then months. Now here we are. Now we're coming out the light. We're basically open. Lights. We've come through the light at the end of the tunnel, and we're kind of trying to get back to things. But tell us about some of the things that you saw out there, as even with your own institute and stuff. What lessons did you learn over the last 24 months that you think our listeners out there would find of interest?
Well, there are more communities that are becoming aware that they don't really have a process for renewal. I mean, in the old days, like more than 24 months ago,
right.
Most communities could kind of skate by on revitalization efforts just by being kind of passive. They just wait for a developer to come to town and say, hey, I can do something useful with that property. And they'd say yes or no. And or in many cases, they didn't care. They just let them do whatever they wanted. And you end up with all these communities that are nothing but sprawl and national chains, where you can't tell one community from another. But the ones that were really in trouble, the ones that had lost population, post-industrial type places, Detroit, Youngstown, Gary, places like that, Pittsburgh, they were already starting to realize that this kind of haphazard reactive mode of revitalization wasn't real efficient. But prior to 24 months ago, they could kind of still get away with it. And what's happened since this whole COVID crisis has economically devitalized so many communities, is that it's created more urgency. People are taking a closer look at how they go about revitalization and realizing that in many cases, they're just relying on magic. They're hope and magic. They just do a bunch of good projects, hopefully good projects, redevelopment projects, whether it's brownfields or watershed restoration or urban stream daylighting or adaptive reuse of buildings or whatever it might be, infrastructure renewal. The old model was basically just do a bunch of good stuff and hope that somehow magically revitalization emerges. Mm-hmm. And you'd think, revitalization, I mean, that's the whole future of your community. You'd think a responsible public leader would put such an important goal in the hands of an actual process and not just hope or magic. But most political leaders are terrified of failure. So they talk about revitalization and all, but really all they ever commit to is individual projects that have a high chance of success. They don't want to actually promise revitalization itself, because then they could be seen as having failed. And it's actually a false thing, because revitalization isn't an endpoint. It's just it's a trajectory. So you can't really fail at revitalization as long as you're trying. But so they don't really understand what revitalization is. So the intelligent ones are realizing that to reliably produce anything, doesn't matter whether you're talking about automobiles or clothing or strawberry jam, it takes a process. That anybody, business person or whatever, will tell you, any good manager will tell you, you need a process to reliably produce something. So if you're trying to produce revitalization, regeneration, resilience, increased quality of life, more jobs, whatever it is your goal is, then the first thing I ask them is, so what's your process? And in most cases, they can't point to one. Let's say, okay, well, let's break it down. Let's talk about just one key component of the process. What's your strategy? And they'll go, we plan to become a community with a wonderful quality of life that's inclusive and blah, blah, blah. And I said, no, that's a vision. Yeah. What's your strategy for achieving that vision? And they go back to, oh yeah, right, here's our strategy. And they'll pull a 200-page book off the shelf and plunk it down in front of me and say, and I'll say, no, sorry, but that's a plan. What's your strategy? And they'll say, oh, this is a strategic plan. Okay, well, open it up to the page. It shows me what the strategy is. They don't have one. I've literally read, you remember that 100 Resilient Cities initiative of the Rockefeller Foundation? One of the first things, pretty much the only thing most of those communities achieved, was the writing of a strategic plan. I read virtually all of them. I didn't find a single one that actually had a strategy. So there's a lot of well-meaning folks, good, intelligent folks, who never actually got trained in what a strategy was. And obviously, with my special forces background, I immediately think in terms of strategy. Because all strategy is a means of success.
Yeah, you want to bring your guys home safe. Yeah.
So
I mean, that's the ultimate thing of being in the armed forces. Yeah, I'm an athlete, so I've been a coach and all this stuff. The bottom line is, listen, game plan is key. Hey, I can have a vision. Hey, we're going to go out and beat that team. But the whole week we're prepping, I have a strategy. Hey, we've seen the film. We know who the guys are we need to cover. This is what we need to do, and we have to execute. So this week, this is what our game plan. This is what our practices are going to be. You practice, so you're going to practice as you play. So on game day, when we get out there, we'll go through the first half, and then we'll kind of retweak. I look at right now the Stanley Cup's going on. I watched game 1 last night. What an awesome game! Went to overtime. The Avalanche won 4-3. But very equal teams. But they both had their strategies on what they wanted to do. And, but you're so right. People have these plans, these grand, but they don't have the strategy in place. And that's probably one of the most important things. You can have,
but most of them don't even know what a strategy is. I'll say.
One thing I was going to say is, with revitalization, my sector, we do retail, restaurant, hospitality, healthcare. Most like a retailer, they're going to revitalize, they're going to, refurbish, new paint, new fixtures every 3 to 5 years, come out with a new prototype. So they kind of have their strategy in place, and hotels, when the shutdown happened, the smart hotels, they might have closed their hotel down, but a lot of people didn't know that they were putting in new carpet, new FF&E, upgrading their, maybe HVAC controls and all that kind of stuff. So when their state or area opened up, their hotel, hey, look what I did. No one knew what was going on. So at least the smart ones did. Some of the other ones, they went out of business or they sat on their hands and they weren't prepared when the country did reopen up. But I think in like a lot of the retailers that, as I said, in this commercial sector, they kind of have that revitalization thing, because they know if they're not building new stores or growing, they can't keep the stockholders happy, they're not growing. or they're not going to consume it. They buy another chain, they've got to redevelop it, put your own brand and signage on there. So I think that, you know, the smart guys in the commercial sector, they get the strategy thing. Not all of them, but you know, they kind of have it. Now it's just kind of improving that process. The biggest thing right now, I had a guest on the other day. I had a contractor on. We were talking about. I said, "Oh my God, the biggest thing that's happening right now with revitalization is that, you know, a lot of the people they worked at home, but now, you know, they want to go to concerts, they want to go to sports events, they want to go camping, but they don't want to go back to the office. So there's all this real estate out there, all this office space that's open. And, you know, if you're a business owner, you know, what do? You don't want to tick off your employees because they've proven that they're productive at home. You do the hybrid gig. Do you offshore it, which isn't, for less money, but you might not get the quality and so forth. So, but all of these owners that have all this real estate, what are we going to do with it? Are we going to turn it into hospitals? Are we going to turn it into housing? Are we going to turn it into, an auto dealership? I mean, I don't know, but that's probably one of the biggest things that's got to get revitalized because people are just not going to come back to the office. They want to work out of their house, or a couple days in the office. And all this stuff is built and it's prime real estate. What do you do with it? And right here in Ohio, the Dayton Mall, I haven't been up here for a while, and it's all closed down. Someone's going to have to knock down all that building and whatever. They have the Moraine GM plant that went out of business God knows how long ago. I mean, 15, 20 years ago. They closed it down, devastated the community, but the building's still there. And I see they had a sign up. We were driving down and I was like, oh my God, that someone's going to redevelop that thing. I don't know what it's going to be, but look how long that building sat there, and we're talking like major acreage. And so it's an interesting concept, strategy. Oh, man, it's probably the most important thing. Special forces, like I said, you don't go out in the field unless you've got your meeting before. Hey, this is what we're going to do. This is how we're going to execute it. This is what you prepared for. Now let's get it done. Let's have everybody come home safe. Am I right?
Oh, it's not just a meeting. In special forces, they have a period they call isolation. And the entire team literally gets locked away incommunicado with the world, at which time they basically dissect the mission, go through every possible aspect, plans, sub-plans, alternate plans, plans B, C, D, what happens if you need to split the group in half or even in three, all that sort of stuff. They spend a week in isolation, rehearsing, going through the entire thing. I mean, it's a very strategic process. But yeah, the business world knows all about strategy. I seldom run across any problems with strategy in business. Military world knows about it. Although I do find some strange examples where, since strategy really isn't taught very well, even in the business and the military world, you find some big gaping holes. For instance, in a lot of business magazines over the last 10, 15 years, you see a lot of people saying, culture eats strategy for breakfast, which indicates that they have no idea what a strategy is. Because if a company has decided that the way they're going to beat their competitors is by having a really good company culture that increases retention of employees and stimulates teamwork and creativity and innovation and all that. That's their strategy. So it's not one or the other. But they just don't seem to understand what strategy is. And even in the military, I had a conversation about 6 months ago with a guy who taught strategy, had been teaching strategy at the Army War College here in Washington. Had been doing so for like 15 years. And he made a comment that a strategy is a plan. And I called him out on it and said, no, I'm sorry, but a plan is not a strategy. There's a heck of a lot more in a plan than just a strategy. You've got all your logistics and everything, that a plan is comprehensive. And he was saying, oh, no, strategy and a plan, the same thing. This is the guy who teaches strategy at the Army War College. And we talked about it for about 15 minutes. At the end, he said, you're right. A strategy is not a plan, and a plan is not a strategy. But so it's a strange area. Everybody uses the word, but there's a lot of confusion about it.
My grandfather, he was a lieutenant colonel in WW2, and he was a combat engineer, and he was underneath Patton in that, and he went across and rebuilt all the bridges that the Allies had bombed. So during the Reconstruction phase, during the war and after, and so when I would go in and spend my time in the scrapyard when I was my teen years, and I'd sit down and have dinner every night, and we would talk. We would talk strategy. And I remember this one time we took it was an old Bethlehem steel plant, and actually I was kind of psyched because it was a paint car. It was a paint sandblasting booths that we had to put up into this Bethlehem steel plant that had gone out of business, and it was just kind of dormant. We had to lay the railroad tracks. We had to, build the sandblasting booths, and we just kind of had to reconfigure it. But it was the superintendent and my three cousins. That was our team, and we had to learn about all this stuff. I learned how to weld, and and every night I would sit down and he would say, "Hey, what did you learn today?" And and so that whole concept of thinking about things, making your mistakes, adjusting, but having that plan is just, crucial. Just like, over the roller coaster, I was a print face-to-face guy. So overnight I had to come, I was kind of frozen and I didn't know what to do. And overnight I've just became, a digital virtual person. And now I look back, I've learned over the last 24 months, I've learned more about myself, my business, my team, and how to react to things much more quickly. And I realized who my friends were, who my allies were, and that you can talk about company culture, but company culture, listen, I'm just the guy. I'm like, hey, let's just get her done, okay? A W on the board. I don't care how you get there. You want to get there the best way possible. It's not if you win 15-0 or if it's 4-3. It's a W. And I just wrote my column about winning, and winning is a contagious thing. But there was one quote that I put in there: win small, win early, and win often. And that's kind of one of the things I've always kept in my close to my best. Whatever I've done, and because that W is the most important thing. And you can build upon it, and like I said, the military is a really excellent example, but even them, they don't get it all right, So
yeah, well, actually, one thing I should clarify there, talking about the difference between a strategy and a plan, is I spent the last 20 years focusing exclusively on efforts to revitalize communities and restore natural resources. So I've probably seen more examples of failures and successes than anybody else on the planet. That's all I do. Is I've been going to conferences all over the world, keynoting them, but I usually stay for the whole conference. So for every talk I do, I usually hear 20 or 30. So there's been constant inflow. And one of the things I've discovered, both from listening to other people's stories and from actually doing work with clients, is one of the most common causes of failure in community revitalization is planning. Is like Eisenhower said, planning is wonderful, but plans are terrible. Plans are a killer, because what happens is most communities, they won't do anything while they're creating a plan, which often takes a year or two. Then once they have the plan, the day the plan is published, it starts becoming obsolete because it's static. And communities have to be flexible like anybody. They have to be flexible and respond to the opportunities and threats of the moment. You can't do that if you have to pull a plan off the shelf every 5 minutes. It's one of the essences of a strategy. Is a strategy has to be so concise that you can keep it in your head. It has to be able to affect day-to-day decision-making. If you have to pull a book off the shelf to find out what your strategy is, it's not going to affect your decision-making. So a plan, I usually counsel places not to do a plan. But the trouble is they're usually required to. The law actually requires most communities to have a comprehensive plan. Or if not the law, then the federal government won't give them funding if they don't have a comprehensive plan. So the concept of a plan is good enough, but in actual fact, an actual process for producing revitalization is far more productive than a plan. It's better to skip the plan altogether.
Interesting, interesting. So, if you wanted to leave our audience out there in Commercial Construction Coffee Talk with one,
Why would I want to leave?
well, no. I mean, well, if you wanted to, if you wanted to plant your seed, just like when you rebuilt the coral reef down, down in the ocean. If you wanted to, plant that seed with some of our listeners out there, with one positive thought or phrase that you've taken out of, through all your, projects that you've done over the year and your military experience and so forth, what would it be?
Well, some of my favorite lines that I've come up with in my talks that seem to resonate the most with folks is, one of them is, what we restore restores us. The places we revitalize us. We have to be aware that regeneration is the essence of life. We're all running around with livers that are less than 3 years old. Our entire bodies are not the bodies we were born with. Everything is being regenerated if it's going to be healthy over the long run. Another one has more to do with social, economic, and environmental justice, which is a major trend in revitalization these days, is making sure that revitalization is more inclusive, more equitable. And that line I came up with is, a rising place should lift all lives. And that seems to be catching on. As a matter of fact, our new Rising Places initiative, which is going to be at risingplaces.org, but it won't be live until October. We're actually selling that merch on Reconomics.org, and can actually buy t-shirts that say, a rising place should lift all lives, or what we restore restores us, the places we revitalize us. And that seems to be catching on quite well.
Nice. Hey, I like it. Hey, listen, every night when I go to sleep, I'm revitalizing myself, because I got to recharge my battery to go through battle the following day. So I totally get to revitalize. It's just like after a game, you got to get you might want to get on the bike, then you get in the ice tub. My mom's like, when do these guys play again? The NHL. So I'm like, oh, they got a couple of days off, but then they got to go beat each other up, on the ice on Saturday. So they got a couple of days to, and they'll retweak it. The guys who lost, they're going to retweak it, and then they'll come out and do battle again. But I revitalize myself every day. When I go to sleep, I've had a long day, and boom, okay, I'm going to go do that whole gig. So if you were going to, let me get rid of this phone. If you were going to, if someone wanted to reach out to you about some questions off to you, how would they reach out to you and connect with you?
You can go to stormcunningham.com. The links to virtually everything I do are on that site. That's my public speaking site, including my email, which is storm@reconomics.org. And
what's the Reconomics website?
Reconomics.org.
Okay, Reconomics.
Yeah. So you can find just about everything at either stormcunningham.com or reconomics.org, or just email me straight at storm@reconomics.org.
Anybody out there that's thinking about revitalization, planning, all the stuff that we've been talking about, because I know you all do it every day. Here's a gentleman that's been around, even though he's only 26, that he's been around the block. So I urge you to, reach out and, bounce some questions off him, because, just in this little short discussion, not only did I learn a couple of things, but, it kind of made my mind think about a couple other things that I've been thinking about. So, the day I stop learning is the day I should go do something else. In my opinion. So for myself, if anybody wants to reach out to me, I'm at davidc@ccr-mag.com. Hey, if you're not a subscriber, up on my toolbar, hit the subscribe button, send out the magazine to 125,000 plus Had another 2.5 million people hit the website again last month, consuming content. So if you have anything cool, I don't care if it's a personnel announcement, charity gopher, you're hiring someone, a new prototype, you're planting some coral, down in Jamaica, whatever. Send it to me. I'll find some place for it. It's very tough to get in the magazine, but listen, I look at everything. So you never know. I know I hate to say it. You don't buy a lottery ticket, you can't win. You don't send me something, I can't find a place to put it. So anyway, that's how you can reach me. So Storm, pleasure meeting you. I hopefully one of these days I'll get to shake your hands. As a vet and and also a restoration person, in person. And I really appreciate the time. And once again, thank you so much for your service. All right.
And thanks for having me on your podcast, David. And definitely look forward to sharing a beer with you sometime.
Yeah, sounds good. So all of you out there, Commercial Construction Coffee Talk, listen, 4th of July is coming up. Remember what that holiday is about. It's about our independence. You can't take that for granted. And enjoy your time with your family. Don't work. Revitalize yourself, have some chicken, have some burgers, maybe a couple of beers, brewskis, drink lots of water, and recharge your battery. Q3 is coming up. We're already halfway through the year. And before you know, it's going to be the holidays. We're going to be closing out the year. Exciting. Every day is exciting. I wake up, politically, business area. By the end of the day, I'm just mentally drained, and I gotta get some shut eye, whether it's a couple hours a night. I still got to revitalize. So when I get up in the morning, boom, I'm ready to tackle the day again and get her done. So with that said, Storm, say goodbye from Arlington, Virginia.
Bye, folks.
And I'm going to say goodbye from Springboro, Ohio, which is between Dayton and Cincinnati off I-75. And we will see you next time on another episode of Commercial Construction Coffee Talk. Storm, look forward to meeting you in person. Thanks so much.
Yep. Take care.
You bet.